morning from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Bridging the Gap, the Digital Divide in Times of COVID-19 webinar. My name is Lakin and I work at World Learning. Several of my colleagues are also on this call and will be engaging with you in the chat bar, so definitely feel free to say hi and introduce yourself there. Many of you on the call know us from our professional exchange programs, and for everyone else, welcome and thank you for joining and getting to know us. We really appreciate your participation in our webinars and events like this. So today's webinar is obviously hosted through Zoom. We'll also be live streaming it to Facebook and YouTube where others will be viewing. So for now, we ask that everyone please keep your mic muted unless you're the one presenting, just so we can be respectful of our presenters. And kind of the order for today, we'll begin with introductory remarks from our panelists. And then we'll head into audience questions. So we'd love if you could write your questions in the chat bar because we really want to have an interactive, engaging webinar. So please introduce yourselves, let us know where you're from, and write any questions for our speakers. My colleagues are tracking the questions, so we'll raise your inquiries to the panelists in just a bit. So with that, thank you and welcome again to join this discussion on the digital divide, which has become even more important during this period of COVID-19. We'll be discussing this with our global panel of speakers who are truly from all over, from Serbia, the US, India, UK, Canada, and Uganda. So we'll definitely hear a variety of perspectives on this topic. And some of the things we'll discuss are the inequitable access to digital tools and how our speakers are working to combat this. Media literacy for various populations, especially during the period of quarantine, and the intergenerational digital divide, just to name a few. So with that, our first speaker is Miss Valerie Wood-Geiger, who is the founder of Learning with Grandma, an international Facebook network, which I encourage everyone to join. I just did, and it is fabulous. She is based in Wales. And Valerie, I know you have to jump off shortly for another webinar, actually. So if you want to go ahead and kick us off today, that would be great.
Well, good afternoon from Wales. It's morning there, but it's afternoon here. Oh, I seem to have muted. No, have I gone?
Nope, now you're on mute. You're muted now, but we could hear you before. You are still muted. There we go. We hear you again.
Oh, that's funny because on my screen it's saying I'm muted. Anyway, very briefly to introduce myself, I'm a granny, a great granny. I have 7 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren, and I'm going to be 80 in July. So as I was saying earlier to the other panelists, don't be afraid to get old. Just don't let your brain get old. But actually, you need to keep the 3 in balance: your brain, your brain, your body, and your soul. Because unless the 3 work together, you don't work so well as a person. You could have Einstein as someone really clever, but if he can't walk or can't move, then he's less able than somebody who keeps active physically. So Learn with Grandma is about intergenerational learning and keeping active. I walk every day. I go up and down the stairs more often than I need, often because I've forgotten what I went up or downstairs for. But Learn with Grandma is basically about connecting across the generations. Pierre, who's going to talk in a minute, works in Canada, and he's been doing great work along these lines for many years. So I'll leave him to tell you more about actual projects. What I'd like to do is just explain the principle a little bit. We always learnt from our elders. It's what we always did. Older people knew more, and so we learnt from them. But then suddenly all this technology appeared, and I didn't want to know. My son insisted that I had an email address, and this was back in the late 70s. And at that time, I used pay-as-you-go because I hardly knew anybody who had an internet address, an email address. Then after a while, I realized I was spending more on pay-as-you-go than I would have done on a contract. So I changed over to contract. I founded Learn with Grandma in the early 2000s. But it wasn't until after I came back from Uganda in 2014 and saw how the young people there were using their phones. I have a phone now, it's here, but I don't use it very much because I live in a very rural area with a very, very poor internet connection. We have cable now, so it's better, but this is where I live. It's in the Brecon Beacons National Park, and it's very beautiful. It is very isolated, and all the more reason to use this technology. What is amazing now is that we are all here as speakers for many different countries. You are listening from many different countries, and we're all in the same room together. This is like magic to me. I never imagined that we could have this intergenerational and international communication. But coming back to intergenerational, as I say, originally we always learnt from our elders, but because you younger people know more about technology than the older ones, there's become this digital divide that we are not connecting in the same way. I'm told that Facebook's old-fashioned now. And to me, I love Facebook. Learn with Grandma, I floated the idea on Facebook. I never imagined in a trillion years that it would become an international network. And how it started was that I came back from Uganda, saw how they were using their phones, realized that we needed to work in a different way. So I started to use what to me was new technology. It's been amazing, and we've achieved an awful lot in a very, very short time, really. My biggest worry now is that, as I say, I'm approaching 80. I am slowing down a bit. I'm still dancing. I'm still walking. I'm still doing all the things I used to do, like lecturing. But I need now to make sure that Learn with Grandma will go on after I've left the stage. So that's my next plan. I don't know how, but God has a way of working these things out. I would like Learn with Grandma to become an international foundation, or indeed for the principles of learning together intergenerationally and keeping active throughout life are taken over by a bigger organization like perhaps yours, Leica. Do you see? It could work either way. I don't know. But what I do know is I ain't never going to give up. So I hope you will join me in Learn with Grandma. There's Learn with Grandma groups in many countries, but the first one to try is Learn with Grandma International, and then I can send you the link to your own country. Okay, is that okay, Leica?
That was excellent and inspiring. Thank you so much for joining us before you head off to speak in Poland. And I will send the link to Learning with Grandma.
It's Learn with, by the way, not learning, because you might not find it if you put learning, but Learn with Grandma.
Perfect.
Actually, I'll put the link in the chat box.
That's great.
No, I can't actually.
I can put it in the chat box too. So we'll make sure everyone gets that, and we'd love if you would all join that and keep connecting. So thank you so much for that presentation.
Well, bye-bye, everybody. I will try and join you again after Poland. But I've got to go to Poland now. Bye-bye.
Best of luck and safe travels.
Thank you. Safe travel from the same seat.
Our next speaker is going to be Miss Maiko Nakagaki. I know I just butchered that, and I really should have done that, practice that better. But she is the Senior Partnerships Manager at the Alliance for Affordable Internet based in Washington, D.C. So if you want to go ahead and begin, that would be great.
Great, thank you. And Valerie, thank you for that very sweet presentation. It was so nice to hear your perspective. So my name is Maiko Nakagaki, and I'm with the Alliance for Affordable Internet, or A4I, as we like to call ourselves. And my presentation is going to be more an objective perspective on the digital divide that we are currently experiencing. So I first wanted to introduce who we are. So A4AI is the world's broadest alliance. We come together with the belief that we need to bring the cost of internet access by focusing on policy and regulatory reform. We have over 100 members today, spanning from large companies, international development organizations, multilaterals, leading civil society organizations like Osama's organization, Digital Empowerment Foundation, Internet Society, and so forth. And we come together with the belief that internet should be accessible to everyone, and it should be affordable, grounded on the principles that internet freedom is fundamental to everything, including freedom of expression, assembly, and association online. So to give you a global context of where we are now, globally, there is around 3 billion people who are unconnected as of today, and that equates to around half of the adult population who are we consider adult, quote unquote, over the ages of 10 and older. And most of them, as you can see in this chart, are from Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, and quite a large number in Latin America as well. And many of them, if you even dive deeper, are from rural and remote areas where access is very difficult. So why is so many people offline? We believe that the major barrier is the cost of access. We define affordability as 1 gigabyte for 2% or less of a given country's national income. This has become a UN standard metric. So let's say a country's national monthly income is $100. We argue that 1 gigabyte should not cost more than $2, sorry, in order to purchase 1 gigabyte. Sadly, as of today, when you look at 100 low and middle income countries as of today, there's only 41 countries who achieve that 1 for 2% target. So most of the countries in developing countries do not achieve that target. And that's really problematic. And if you look at the profiles of people who are offline, the unfortunate thing is that most of them are women in developing countries. So we're really doing a disservice to the people around the globe, especially women from developing countries, if we don't tackle this problem. We recently did a study with the International Telecommunication Union and the G20 Digital Economy Task Force, where we were commissioned to investigate how much investment it would take to connect the 3 billion people by the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And we came up with this number that it would take around 400 billion to connect everyone on Earth by 2030, taking into account the people who will reach the age of 10 by then. As you'll see, most of the investment is needed around infrastructure development, but I also want to note that digital skills development and local content development is a significant portion, and also investing in improving policy and regulations to expand access is also a key part. I also want to highlight the fact that affordability is a key factor to overcoming this barrier. As I mentioned, while almost 3 billion people are not online today, it's not because the infrastructure doesn't exist. If you look at this chart, actually there are many parts of the world where 4G coverage exists. It's just it's very difficult to access that coverage due to the high cost of data services or the high cost of purchasing a device. We actually did a study where we compared how much monthly income it would take to buy the cheapest smartphone in a given country, and you would be very surprised to see how many days it would take for a person to work to buy a simple smartphone these days. And we also wanted to highlight that digital skills attainment is a very crucial part of enabling everyone to come online. Along with this, I also wanted to highlight, given that this discussion was supposed to be around COVID, so A4A has been around for around 7 years. We've been talking about internet and affordability as a key thing and bringing everyone online. But it has become the topic since COVID, and we're very happy. But I think what we should learn from this is that the shocking inequality has existed, it's just been amplified. So in our brief that released over the spring, we encouraged governments, companies, civil society, and forming public-private partnerships to take immediate actions such as, reducing or eliminating consumer-facing taxes for digital access, avoiding internet shutdowns, encouraging companies to offer zero-rating services, and so forth. But we really want to encourage policymakers and companies to think about how their emergency policies, quote unquote, can actually become long and sustainable policies moving forward so that we can actually reach that 2030 goal of bringing everyone online, and that it doesn't have to take a global emergency to reach and realize the digital inequality that's happening. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love the last words you mentioned, where it doesn't have to take a global emergency to kind of get the ball rolling on these things. So thank you for that great presentation. It was very informative. So our next speaker is going to be Mr. Osama Manzar, who is the founder and director of the Digital Empowerment Foundation based in New Delhi, India. So if you would like to go ahead and start, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Thank you for getting me on this platform, and great to see people from all over the world participating in it. Maiko has already presented the intensity of digital divide, the numbers all over the world and all that. So I don't know what to say beyond that. But I would like to share some perspective from the perspective that, in the light of COVID, what you actually is considering that in the light of COVID, how digital divide has come into the picture in a different manner, and it's very interesting. Internet is with us for the last 30 years, and it has grown over a period of time to reach more than 3 billion people. So I think we should also thank internet that at the time of COVID, at least half the world is connected, and we have been able to communicate. We have been able to see each other despite the fact that we are not physically with each other. We are able to do business. We are able to do problem solutions, many of the problems. What I actually would like to highlight is that for the last 10, 15, 20 years, perhaps we had forgotten what digital divide was as a phrase. We had forgotten how to use it. We were using mostly digital inclusion. We were, talking about digital perhaps exclusion and the intensity of people who are not connected and so on and so forth. But this phrase has come back in the light of COVID, because suddenly what is the perspective that has come into our lives? I think what is the most important aspect that COVID has brought is the over dependency or no alternative based dependency on digital. So it's something like earlier I didn't have a connectivity, but I could walk to some place where there was a connectivity. I had a physical way of working. I had a way of reaching out physically, and so on and so forth. But now what is happening is that even those people who are not connected, their life is dependent on connectivity irreversibly. And I don't know, many of the people know that in India, poorest of the poor person who do not have a connectivity cannot reach out to their food or ration without having the connectivity available to them, because their identity needs to be checked through biometric or the POS machine, or which is dependent in real time on connectivity. So even the basic needs are dependent on connectivity. I would like to highlight that how digital divide can be categorized in about 4 to 5 ways in the light of digital divide. So I would say that there is one category which is unconnected, which we all know. People who are unconnected is certainly at the wrong side of the digital divide. But with the new meaning that A4AI has brought in, we also have people who are connected, but not meaningfully connected, but they are connected, but they can't do business. They can't do video conferencing. They can't do payments online. They can't do transactions. They can't do studies online. They can't reach their doctors online, and so on and so forth. But they are connected. They are part of those 3.5 billion people, so-called connected people. But their life doesn't move even though they are connected. They can't go for education because when all the schools are closed, all the colleges are closed, all the educational institutions are closed, they are suddenly only dependent on digital. So those are the people who are also part of those digital divide, which actually is statistically not digitally divided, but they are suffering because of being digitally excluded, I would say, because they are connected, they are included, but yet excluded. And the third part is the people who are connected, but they are suffering because of the misinformation and fake news and disinformation. They are overwhelmed by the information. They are suffering because they are unable to figure out what is right information, what is wrong information. And there is a huge number of that population which is affected because of being connected and yet suffering because of the connectivity. And the fourth category, I would say, which you, Lakin, pointed out, is about media literacy, or information literacy, or digital literacy. Is the people who are connected, but they are not literate enough, or digitally literate enough, or information literate enough to figure out how to deal with the information or how to deal with the connectivity. So they are either unsafe, they're insecure or unsecure, or they don't know how to use the connectivity in a manner which can benefit them. They are mostly being used as data. They are mostly being used as connected people, but consumers. They are not information producers. They are not in the situation where they could figure out what is right for them, what is wrong for them. So this is very interesting aspect, that how COVID brought us into thinking that the same connectivity which we have defined as connected can be categorized in so many manners that they can create classification of I am a literate, educated, connected. I am connected and meaningfully connected. I am connected, but functionally unconnected, because I cannot do a full functional connectivity of ours. So this is very interesting that this kind of discussion can brought us in a situation where, because this COVID is not going to go away, this situation that has come in our life where our dependency is more and more on digital is not going to go away. What we need to figure out is that how do we find meaning into this connectivity? How do we make sure that those people who are not connected should join the connectivity, but in a manner that they are safe, they are secure, they are literate, they are educated, and they are meaningfully converting their connectivity into their lives. So I would really like to learn from other speakers is that how who are working in different countries where we can apply the meaning of digital connectivity in such a way, or digital divide in such a way, that our learning can help each other to be meaningfully connected and purposefully connected. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. As always, your presentation was great. And I really like the point where you discussed, being connected, but not being meaningfully connected. And that's something that I've never considered with this topic, but that's so important. So hopefully we will get some answers to some of those questions you raised during our Q&A and from the other speakers. So now we'll head to Ms. Joan Katambi, the founder and CEO of the Digital Literacy Initiative based in Kampala, Uganda. So if you would like to go ahead, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, everyone, and to the World Learning for giving me this opportunity to actually speak. And yes, I work with the Digital Literacy Initiative back here in the country. It's a non-profit that provides ICT awareness, and of course we work to ensure a safe digital space in Uganda and Africa as a whole. So we embrace an integrated approach to skilling, empowering communities, the public, private sector, and the business, as well as government and stakeholders, to see that we have a full utilization and application of ICT. Back to the fora. At the end of 2019, ITU estimated about 3.6 billion people being offline. The situation has even been worse in least developing countries such as my own, Uganda, where an average of 2 out of every 10 people are online. While progress has been made in bridging the digital divide, COVID-19 has actually brought to the fore how, access to ICTs in many parts of the world and access to these and empowering ICT still remains a challenge to many people. So access to, of course, credible information has been crucial in this COVID-19. In the response to our fragmented and often confusing information ecosystem, like my previous panelists addressed, issues of messaging apps, digital platforms having been recruited to disseminate accurate information related to the pandemic. Of course, government right here and organizations such as WHO in Uganda have used these digital technologies to provide accurate reporting on COVID-19. However, without a proportionate response to provide the same information through other channels, those who have no access to digital technologies found it very hard and unable to respond to the ongoing crisis with the right information. And of course, this was really critical, especially in the light of the many, misinformation and fake news, that came all over during and still now on the COVID-19. In the field of education and learning, of course, disruptions in the delivery of our lessons to students and the shift to online learning has made the digital education divide even more pronounced. According, of course, to the UNESCO, around 1.5 billion learners have been affected, including my country, Uganda, caused by COVID-19. Of course, this has represented 89.4% of the total enrolled learners globally. Unfortunately, a shift to virtual classrooms cannot be done overnight. You will all agree. Because especially we need infrastructure, which will include stable electricity. In my country, which is not the same, some areas are more privileged than others. So you find that where those schools are, learning still has been a challenge. The network infrastructure, people having access to these mobile devices, like my previous panelists talked of, meaningful connectivity. While we found out that other students and parents could have, the devices for this education. But again, the challenge was the internet speeds were very low, and some of them could not even have the money to pay for the data bundles to be able to access the services. In addition to that, some, parents could not even afford the computers, and of course, internet connectivity is still lacking. We speak about the fourth generation, but we have not fully acquired the technology right here back in my country in most of the areas. So concerns have also been raised on how these have actually disadvantaged our access to ICTs, more especially for women, persons with disabilities who are students, school-going children have been left, behind, and they are still suffering more because of the ongoing situation. Of course, this brings us to the point that while the current pandemic is new to many of us, so it came as a surprise, the digital divide has been with us for quite some time now. right in my country, and I believe in other African countries. So the differential access to ICTs across many lines, including gender, age, and socio-economic status, continues to hamper people's meaningful participation in the digital society. So we need to think along those lines if we are to really work and bring the digital equity across all sectors. So I think, to me, we need a multi-stakeholder model that will bring everyone on board: civil society, government, private, public, everyone on this issue now that is even more important than never before. Thank you for now.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Mr. Pierre Polin, who is the Wilfred Bastien School contact for Learn with Elders, based in Montreal, Canada. And he also has some volunteers there with him. So if you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself, introduce your students, we'd love to see them as well.
Well, bonjour, everyone. I'm actually in the principal office in a real school, and right in front of me, there's the schoolyard where there are all these children playing, which is a nice view, thinking about this horrible year that 2020 seems or is. So I'm going to briefly talk about apprentissage, which is learn with elders, and that it was also learn with grandma, of course, especially when I met with Valerie online. So I will, if you allow me, I will share the screen with you for a little while, just to make sure, is it going to work? No? Okay, I'm trying to share. It's not going to happen, will it? Okay, well, anyway, later I can share there was only one image and a few pictures, but you can all get there to the website and watch for yourself. So what is apprentissage? What is learn with the elders? It's a project that started 20 years ago. I'm an elementary school teacher by day, and 20 years ago, somehow we decided to include elders in the teaching, in the day-to-day teaching. So at the beginning, we had to create a contact with them. And so with a small group of grade 5s, so they are students aged between 10 and 11, they would go once a week, share a meal with elders from here around the school. And the meal sharing, after a few years, it became a desire to share knowledge about the web. So we were in 2007, and students actually helped a group of seniors to start their own website and help them connect. Now, earlier, someone mentioned that it's important to have the generations share what they know and how useful it can be, especially in times like these. So it happened at that time. So we started with the meals in 2003, and then in 2007, here comes the web and the sharing with the computers and iPads and on the web, and we would help seniors to create their own email, for example, or yet we would teach, and the students would teach them how to use YouTube, for example. And later, the project developed and developed more and more, and with more ideas from the students and from their parents as well, and from the elders themselves. And in 2015, we started to have students, a small group again, helping Alzheimer patients. They would go once a week across the street, and they would work with them in different activities designed for the Alzheimer patients. And that was, I would say, a major update of this activity with mixing elders and the youth. And now with the COVID situation, well, there was another change again. So we were not able to go across the street to meet with them, and they were not able to come to the class anymore. So what we did is that we decided to invite them on our virtual classroom. So really new this year, for the first time, apprentissage is 100% online. So it means that students will do homework. Well, they come to class, of course, every day. For now, we're fine. But if we need to close the classroom, well, then it goes all online. And then the elders, they are there on the same platform with the students. And this is one positive thing maybe about COVID, that it showed me that when you think it's desperate, or when you think your activity you have had for so many years has to stop, well, then you can find ways to keep it going again. So yes, there are a group of 5, 6 elders in the classroom online, and yes, they are exchanging and talking and about the maths, about reading, about writing, about arts. They're sharing experiences, and I know my students, they really appreciate that extra support with homework, with special projects coming from these elders. And I want to finish with this. Another thing that we learned is that, well, the elders we have, they're not necessarily in Montreal. There's one that's in Guatemala. There's a few of them are in Quebec City. And so the classroom, their classroom is the world. And we have elders and students now working together to improve their grades, improve their motivation, increase it. And for now, I'm really, really happy of what's happening with this program, this project. And if I could finish with this is something I think we will all learn from the COVID situation and learning online, is that you'll have to forget online learning if parents and their parents are kept in the dark. So we teachers need to be really open. We need to change the way we see things, the way we see learning, and adapt to the situation. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's fascinating how you've been able to create this digital network from your school there, which is a great opportunity for your students. And if you are able to share your screen at some point, maybe later when we're doing the Q&A and show us those images, that would be great. And if not, you can share that with me and I can share it out to everyone. So now, rounding out our panelists, we'll head to our final speaker before we go to audience questions, Mr. Michael Ohia, which I also probably did not pronounce right, the Advocacy and Engagement Manager of the Global Forum for Media Development, and he is based in Belgrade, Serbia.
Thank you very much, Lakin. I'm gonna try and keep my comments actually quite short, so we can get straight to the questions. But basically, there's 2 key points that I want to really highlight. And so a lot of people have already really covered most of those good points. So I'll start with essentially what's been said first. And Osama really hit very hard, and also Maiko, on the points about meaningful connectivity, about how important that is. And interestingly enough, a few years ago, before I was with GFMD, I was working a lot on, and this is, so I actually wear 2 hats. One is GFMD, which is what I'm here now representing, but I also am a steering committee member of an organization called the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition. And as part of that, obviously we have a charter, and within the charter are multiple articles that deal with digital divide, sustainability in many different ways and different forms. And of course, one of those is environmental sustainability. And back in 2006, 2007, I started making a connection between, I started investigating ICT sustainability as it relates to, basically, our devices are, what's the relationship between our devices and the internet and climate change, things like that. And over time, I started recognizing that if I'm going to be focusing on sustainability as it relates to devices and whatnot, then we also have to think about it within the context of access. And I started thinking about sustainability and access as being really intertwined. And it's really not just about making sure that people can get online, and that's where the green element of it comes in. What kind of power are our devices using, and that sort of thing. How are they manufactured? Where are they coming from? But also, how do we ensure that people can stay online? And that's very much what Osama spoke to, and many of the others that we already heard from as well, about. Is there information in local languages? Are policies being created that are actually relevant to people in rural and remote communities? How much are we able to support, for instance, community networking, the bottom-up approach to creating, to communities actually creating their own infrastructure, building their own infrastructure, and managing it? Those are all key to really bridging the digital divide, especially now with COVID. I mean, one thing to discuss whenever we talk about internet access, and yes, just around half of the population of the global population is online, but around 3.5 billion people lack access to what's called meaningful connectivity in terms of electricity, and just around 1 billion people also don't have access to electricity and energy. This is so important when considering the digital divide, because oftentimes before you can even get online or be able to charge your phone, let's say, you need somehow access to energy. And so these two really go hand in hand. And I will put some resources in the chat in order to help flesh that out, what I'm discussing. Now, putting my other hat on just for a second, especially as it relates to this year with COVID-19, one of the biggest problems that we've seen with the digital divide that is exacerbating is the lack of access to information, and as it relates to especially health and well-being, and what's happening in terms of lockdown information, how to order how to gain access to things that we need, groceries, services, whatnot. And one of the biggest things that we found at the Global Forum for Media Development is that the digital divide is significantly hampering the way that individuals can access journalism and news media content, whether it be through social media, whether it be through more traditional news and journalism outlets. But essentially, COVID is undoubtedly exacerbating the digital divide. And for us, especially at JFND, we're very concerned about how already there is so much misinformation and disinformation that circulates online. The limited ability to then be able to get access to credible, verifiable, accurate sources of news is very, very important, and that is definitely facing new kinds of threats, especially as COVID and the economic situation that COVID has unleashed is also significantly impacting journalism and news media organizations around the world. Sustainability, as it relates to financial sustainability, is of a key concern to news media outlets. And the thing is we're all part of this ecosystem. If news and journalism go, where do people go to get their information that they need, that is verified, that has been fact-checked, that is professional, that is accurate, etc.? And it definitely presents even more problems, and this extends to bloggers, citizen journalists, influencers, etc., especially across the global South, where maybe there is more informal ways to get access to information and access to news. So between these two, getting people online and being able to keep them online, as well as ensuring people have access to information, these are two very key points that we should be considering going forward. And I would be very happy to discuss concrete policy proposals and whatnot going forward. So that's me, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your remarks. So at this point, we're going to move on to audience questions. So if anybody has any of those for any of the speakers or the panel in general, please write them in the chat bar, and we will present those to our speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a pretty broad question that I feel a few of you have been touching on, but just to drive it home a little bit. So what actions can we take to pursue digital inclusion and equity? And kind of going off of that, what is the relationship between the digital divide and mental health, emotional health, and kind of the overall quality of life, especially during the pandemic? So if anybody, really any of the speakers who have any thoughts on that can go ahead and start us off.
So since everybody is waiting for somebody else, so I would put in a little bit of mine. Yeah, good question from the perspective that what's the way forward, and actually what kind of solutions are we looking for. Digital divide certainly cannot, what we feel is that it cannot be really fought or met with the expectation that only telcos will solve this problem or only government will solve this problem. I think a huge number of participative responsibility will actually solve the problem. Also, because one thing we must realize and know that most of the people who are on the wrong side of digital divide are also the people who are indigenous, tribal, remote residents, rural, who have a huge issue of affordability of technology, affordability of connectivity. So unless it is participative, it's not going to really happen. And one example that we would like to also give, like recently in India, there are 320 million students, and most of them are digitally divided now, and they are not accessible to any educational opportunities. And a new initiative that we started, that can people donate their used but functional devices, so that it can be reached to the people who need it. So similarly, many of the efforts can be that how we can minimize the cost of access, how we can, like Maiko also said in her presentation, that how affordability is a big issue, how we can actually pressurize government to come out with various kind of possibilities to minimize the cost of access, minimize the cost of devices, or maximize the opportunity of access to money, access to finances, which can enable people on zero interest or something to access those things. So these are some of the things that we must, and there are, of course, there are alternative technologies, there are frugal technologies that can be accessed. As far as the mental health is concerned, I don't think mental health was not a problem previously, but certainly because a large population is working from home, there is a huge amount of mental health issues that is coming up. And that is certainly the issue that every organization and every individual and family needs to be taken care of, because it's affecting the family, it's affecting the work, it's affecting the output, it's affecting the ecosystem. And I don't want to say that we have a solution or anybody has a solution, because a lot of people are also going through a lot of learning curve, that when your work and home are all together, then what kind of mental health can be an issue. But I think more and more experiential sharing will also give us an opportunity to learn from each other.
I can go next. As Osama already articulated very well, I think there is also a need for global action. I applaud the efforts of the UN. They have this initiative called UN Digital Cooperation. And they've been leading for about 2 years, and the UN Secretary General published the roadmap this year, which is a great, I think, first step, but there's so much more to do. As I alluded, if we are to achieve the SDG goal in the next 10 years, we have a lot to do. And the 400+ billion figure I mentioned earlier, our comms team did a little analysis, and globally, consumers spend over 400 billion on sodas every year. And we wanted to allude to the fact that if we can spend that much on consuming sugary water, perhaps we can encourage citizens, but also, governments and so forth, to come together and address the digital divide as well. Thanks.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Jen.
Thanks, everyone. I would also want to add my voice from my fellow panelists. Connectivity is very important to every life. So you find that this concern, which is now is known as the digital divide, and for the most parts of the world, it has referred to a situation where populations can access the hardware, specifically to computers, tabs, and the rest of the technology. But as tech evolved and has become more complex, this has really become a major concern. Now that the discussion of the digital divide is framed in terms of where the population has access to hardware, internet, and viable connection speeds, and the right skills they actually need, such as information literacy skills, digital skills, to be able to use this technology effectively. But of course, as the norm has changed, so we need national conversations that now are able to frame a matter as that will result into a digital equity. Because we believe with digital equity, people should be able to access and effectively use the technology necessary to participate in the modern society. Because we believe when you talk about digital equity and inclusion, first, all governments or all stakeholders must look at digital equity as an ultimate goal, while the digital inclusion is a means to be able to achieve that goal. And of course, we need to also try to address challenges that come as Osman talked about, and issues of affordability and taxation are very, very key. You find that when you look at the combination of low incomes back in my country, the cost of the devices, charging fees, data plan payments, create affordability barrier to accessing this and mobile internet. The issue now is even compounded by government taxes and fees such as airtime taxes, handset taxes, and issues of over-the-top services like you've had in Uganda. For example, in July 2018, the Uganda's government introduced the over-the-top tax, commonly known as the social media tax, for online services such as WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter. And you find that these are the applications that are more used by the youth, to communicate, disseminate information. Even while we thought of learning, these were the first platforms that we came on board to introduce WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, to be able to disseminate information. But you find that this has still been hard to us, the educators and the learners, because of affordability issues. So I think more needs to be done when it comes to, speaking about meaningful connectivity. Thank you for now.
Thank you guys so much. If there are no other remarks, I'll go ahead and
May I just say something? It was particularly to Uganda. When I was in Uganda, I noticed an awful lot of older people who knew very well how to use their mobile phone for mobile money to ask their family for more money. I think a question of how we use the technology is how we need to use the technology. And sometimes people make it too complicated. Let's go back to basics. A little story. Only a few weeks ago, a little boy said to his dad, "I've got a puncture on my bike." And his dad said, "I'll mend it at the weekend." And he said, "It's okay, I've asked Gramps to do it, and he's going to show me how." The same day, Gramps had said to his son, "I've decided to tax my car online because it's easier and I don't have to go into the post office. Will you show me how?" It's at these basic levels of just showing people how. Okay?
Thank you so much. We're glad that you're back.
Yes,
So-
it was interesting in Poland. I won't go into that though.
So our next question relates a little bit more specifically to digital literacy. So how can we increase both the digital literacy and the digital access of specific groups, specifically maybe older adults, persons with disabilities, and other underprivileged groups? I believe we mentioned that women are also a huge group that are lacking digital access. So how can we really work to target these underrepresented groups?
Well, as a woman and as an older woman, I suppose I fit in both of those categories. I think we have to accept that some people will not face this revolution. People evolve. My grandmother lived in a thatched cottage and she wanted electricity downstairs, but not upstairs because she didn't trust electricity. She went to bed with a candle. My mother never learnt to drive. I have evolved to become an older person. I wasn't when I started that old, but I've become an older person that uses the internet. There will be those who don't want to get involved, but more and more we're finding that the evolution that is happening. A friend of mine in France, she started a project to teach older people how to use the internet. And initially it was mostly middle class people and mostly middle class ladies who joined in. She thought that within a decade that would the take up would diminish. Instead, it's got bigger and bigger and bigger because we're moving down the social scale to those people who would have ignored it 10 years ago, now realizing that actually they want to be part of this revolution. So don't worry too much about people. Let them come and say, I want to do this. I want to tax my car online. I want to find that recipe that I've lost. Those are the ways we will capture the older people, in my opinion.
Thanks, Valerie. Michael, go ahead.
Again, yeah, I can come in here as well and kind of actually build on some of Valerie's points in that there is no single one-size-fits-all solution to this. Essentially, to answer that question, it all needs to be individual and community-based. What I mean by that is when we're trying to address that, it cannot be in a top-down fashion. You can't say, well, these are the best practices. This is what's worked well here. It will automatically work there. It might. Something that worked well in, let's say, Latin America, it may work in certain parts of Central Africa, let's say, but that's not to say it's guaranteed. The important thing is, especially when we're thinking about bridging the divides, the best thing that we can do is go to the individuals themselves and ask, what do you need? What do you want? What does this look like to you? Do you feel like you are currently missing from your life that this could essentially bring you, whether that's weather reports, if they're a farmer somewhere, or whether it's how to know what the market price is or the market meeting times are of their local market, or it could be something like they recently had relatives move to a different place and they want to keep in touch with them. So it could be, communications. But essentially, the only way to answer that question is to ask the people that are not connected. And so that's why that local on-the-ground stakeholder engagement is so important and so critical to the long-term sustainability of any efforts to try and get more people online or continue to get people online, is that it has to be centered around them. And if it's not centered around them, it likely will not go, it likely won't stay sustainable in the long term.
Can I add to that that the other thing too is that I don't know how, I drive a car, but I don't know how it works. And I'm pretty much the same with technology. We don't have to know how it works. We want to know how to work it. And too often people try to tell you how it all works. Oh, and by the way, Joan, another thing, coming back to the farmers and the prices, when I was in Uganda, I was told that the internet access there is actually, it's much better than we've got here in Wales, because our system is very old now and theirs is much newer. And one of the reasons it was put in across Uganda, Tanzania and Kenya was so that the farmers could see the price of coffee direct, rather than being told by the middleman what they were going to pay. So again, it was because of a need that the thing happened.
Thank you guys for answering that question for us. So I'm going to go to one of the questions we've had in the chat bar. I think it's absolutely a great question and very relevant to everything going on today. This question is from Artemis, and it is, so the pandemic has shown us that we are adaptable, but sometimes we still fail to prepare for these type of situations like the pandemic, thinking they'll never happen. So what kind of actions can we take right now to provide information on new technologies to make them affordable for, you know, future crises we might have?
Okay, once more, I'll take the lead. There are now 3 things that we can be sure of in this life: death, taxes, and that there will be another pandemic. So we have to be prepared. And what we have learnt from this last pandemic is that if you're not prepared, it costs a jolly sight more than if you are prepared. What I have suggested, I doubt our government will listen, is that we should actually buy when the prices are lower, like a supermarket does, so that you change your stock all the time. You have a high stock, you keep the high stock of whatever materials you need, and then you take from those and replace, so that you're never in the situation that we were in this time of stupid contracts being given to companies who weren't able to produce the items. It's been a nightmare. We're going to be paying for this pandemic long after I've gone.
One of the things that I wanted to share was, internet came as a most democratic, tool in the lives of humans, in terms of connecting people, giving equal opportunity to everyone to share, consume, produce content, and so on and so forth. And what is interesting in the last 5 years, that we found that the same internet is becoming something which is more capitalist, more top-down, more, giving power to few people to control the masses, both in terms of politics, economy, and there are several things. And at the end of it, it's looking like that the internet has reached to that level where it is treating everyone as data point and trying to use it to create its own narrative, which will be meaningful only to few people who want to control either from the political perspective or economic perspective. So it's very important at this point of time to see that what is the level of control that we are giving to technology or connectivity or the communication tool, and is this tool controlling us or we are controlling the tool. And having said that, I am not even saying that if somebody is controlling today, that means tomorrow it should be controlled by another set of people. But no, I mean, how do we humanize data and internet and connectivity rather than datafy the humans, or digify the humans? It's very, very important that this whole issue of digital as a necessity in our life is almost going to overpower the humans. So how do we take that control back into the hands of people to control the connectivity and the technology and the communication, that what we know it today for, and what effort that will require. We have seen elections after election being controlled by connectivity. We see social media, which came as connecting people, to actually disconnecting people, or rather dividing people. We have seen the new film called Social Dilemma, which actually shows the many aspects of human behavior, how it is changing, and political behavior, how it is changing. So basically, I'm trying to say is that while we are fighting and working on overcoming digital divide, but are we also talking or thinking about how to decontrol internet from the clutches of human beings?
Thank you so much. And I would also like to add a point. Of course, building a digitally inclusive economy, a community rather, requires participation and support from all sectors. Libraries, community-based organizations, businesses, government, and policymakers. So we need strategies that would work for all of us, and even come up with projects that seem, similar, but of course implemented differently, so that they can accommodate local populations and be able to utilize resources. One key, of course, answer to this is if we could have digital libraries, within our countries. These are key community platforms for digital inclusion, and they are critical in overcoming the gap of, digital equity and, literacy, while actually moving communities forward. So, and then too, of course, we also must look at evaluating now our policy interventions more than ever, just in case now we get another heavy pandemic or even others coming on board. So evaluating our policy interventions from the perspective of, having an inclusive, ICT or community or country will also make this much better when we are actually prepared. This will, help us take us forward if we are looking at all sectors now being online and working with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe Osama has to head to another call. So if you had any final thoughts or anything, feel free to share those before you leave. And then we'll follow up with some questions still.
Thank you very much. And it was lovely speaking to all of you. And look forward to all the resources that is created in the chat box. And please share that with all of us. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you for giving this opportunity to speak to all of you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, I will share those out for sure.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. I'm going to head to another question. So for our panelists, for those of us who are on this call who maybe aren't working in the digital communication field or working on these issues each day, more maybe like a micro level, what kind of practical strategies or like ways we can help in our communities with some of the issues we're hearing about in the news with the digital divide, such as maybe students who are doing virtual school but don't have internet access, or grandparents who are quarantined away from their grandkids but can't connect with them. Are there any ways that we can kind of help tackle some of these issues, even if we're not, working on at the policy making level, more in our communities?
Yeah, I can go. So I know I live in Washington, D.C., and when the pandemic started, D.C. government started a digital equality fund. I forget the actual name, but it's a fund. It's basically a subsidy to give to people who don't have who didn't have internet access at home, or provide subsidies to purchase devices. And so forth. I think if you want to get involved locally, there are many organizations that have drives to collect used laptops, like second-use laptops that you may be able to donate to. I think that's a great way. There's also, if you are so inclined to, there are movements within the U.S. but overseas as well around community networks and municipality networks as where the community comes together and owns internet connection. And I think that's a really powerful way to ensure that a community that might be underserved or that might not be attractive to the typical large internet service providers to come together and build their own network and make it self-sustainable. There are many ways to get involved at the local community, and I would encourage you, rather if it's donating a laptop or thinking more about increasing access to community networks to seek out. There are many organizations that work on these issues. So.
In Uganda, I mentioned Moses Wamanga. He runs an organization called Kawa and works for a big American charity as in charge of the ICT in literally hundreds of schools throughout Uganda. And he has had a project policy of setting up ICT clubs for the older students within the schools. It's proved very, very successful. And the Ugandan government has now given the go-ahead to enlarge this network. I'll tell you more about it, Joan. My suggestion is that when the pandemic is history, we can encourage more intergenerational activity via these local clubs. The local clubs within the schools will be open for the students to show their elders how to use the internet, and by the same token, to learn skills from the older people. So that's ongoing, but we can't really start it whilst the pandemic is still raging. But we are preparing.
Yes, thank you so much, Valerie. And of course, to add on to that, I think even our, regulators have to come on board to see that this is solved. One, if they could reduce maybe the cost of the internet to make affordability, much easier for everyone, including people in the rural areas, and also so that our students are able to access the internet. Because an example, of course, we have right here again, like the regulator, the Uganda Communications Commission, has come on board through the RCDF fund to give, to set up, labs in the different schools so that they can have access to internet and also be able to use the device. Of course, this is work that is still in progress, but at least there is will there is government will to make it even much better. But we would also call upon other, the ISPs, if they could work on their internet issue to see that our students or anyone is able to have the internet and be able to stay online for the better.
Thank you guys so much for answering that question. So now I wanted to see if any of our speakers had any final or concluding remarks or thoughts they wanted to share with us before we wrap up here today.
Well, one for you, first of all, Lakin. It's helpful if you can send the chat list to everybody, because, you know, those links been put up there, but we're not able to capture them. I'm not anyway. So if you can send that out, I think that's extremely useful. But also, if all of the other contributors, presenters don't mind, let's share emails. Let's share other ways of being in contact in the future. Because you never know, I might be invited to another Zoom and want to invite you.
Yes, I absolutely will share out the chat content and all of the links and resources you guys have sent.
Obviously, for those who are happy to do that.
I'm
happy.
Lakin, if it's okay, may I actually address one of the questions that was asked in the chat real quick before we wrap up? Yeah, so thank you. Nicole Rouhani asked a very good question. She asked, does the digital divide play a role in the spread of misinformation online? And then as a follow-up question, what skills need to be developed to help navigate misinformation online? This is such a great question, actually, because the digital divide plays a huge role in the spread of misinformation. Part of that is the fact that it's actually, research shows that it's actually older individuals that tend to be more susceptible to disinformation, misinformation, and other kinds of especially electronic, let's say, efforts to convince somebody of the world in one way or another. So digital media literacy is obviously key here, critical thinking training and whatnot. But just as that's important for young people, it's very important for older folks as well. And so, for instance, I definitely challenge you, Valerie, and the people that you know and the networks that you work with to see how to actually encourage, especially older people, to well, it's not just about encouraging, it's about helping to train older people and how to spot misinformation and how to understand the differences between a trusted source and a non-trusted source. And that might seem self-evident, especially to someone who has been reading the news for, let's say, 50, 60, 70 years, more, 80, you know, but the thing is that this actually goes to show one of the problems with independent journalism today as well, is that for the longest time, there were very, let's say, strict guidelines and ethical guidelines that held journalism and information sharing to a standard. But that although that still exists, it is a lot easier to now to get information from places that might not necessarily be held to those same kinds of standards. So it's important that we protect ourselves. It's important that we protect the people that we love. And when I say protect, it's really more educate, inform, work with them, share how we can build, how we can, you know, understand the information that we process in a much healthier way. But then also, in terms of navigating that misinformation, it's important to know where we can get those resources. So there are multiple games that are available. There are things like Media Bias Fact Check, which is a resource where you can go and actually learn about what different people are saying, or what you can learn about the bias of let's say, of a news network or of a journalism outlet. But then you can also read different sources of news. For instance, there are aggregators now where you can see what different journalism outlets are writing about a topic. So it really encourages us to be more holistic in terms of what is out there, what information is being gathered, and especially helps us to understand what people from different sides of an opinion might think about something. But then in addition to that, we need to think about especially some of the more, let's say, provider kind of issues, the upstream issues as well. And what I mean by that is, if we need to support strong journalism, we need to be able to make sure that journalists and news media organizations, independent media, cross-border journalism, that they can survive. Because one of the problems with the digital divide and with misinformation and disinformation is that good journalism, good information is very expensive to produce, but bad information is very easy to produce, can be produced by anyone, and that has a malicious property that is really undermining so many societies around the world. The antidote to misinformation is good journalism. That's what we say anyway. And so there's a lot more to be said by that, but just know that there are both consumer and, let's say, supply solutions to this, I think. Sorry, being long-winded.
Addressing that. That was definitely one of the motivations behind the webinar, were kind of some of those topics. So thank you so much for addressing that. And if any of the other speakers wanted to comment on that as well, or say any final comments, feel free now to do so.
I can say one more thing. If you are interested at all in continuing discussions to closing the digital divide globally through policy issues, please follow A4AI. We're on Twitter and everything. So thank you.
Well, I assume Lakin's going to send us all of those links. Michael, I was very interested in what you were saying just then. And what I think I would like for Learn with Grandma is a very brief little post that we can put on Learn with Grandma International about how you spot fake news. Because Mr. Trump was very, very good at giving fake news and then claiming everybody else was doing fake news. But how do you spot it? And that would be a very useful thing to have. So go for it.
Thank you.
Feel free to get in touch with me.
Anyway, I will say goodbye, if I may. And lovely, Joan, lovely to meet you particularly. We will be in touch because I want to introduce you to Moses. But everybody, because of Lakin organizing this very useful seminar, I'm sorry I had to dive off to Poland, but that was also interesting. And how amazing that one can be in America and Poland on the same day. But let's keep in touch. And see ways that we can help one another lessen the divide without forcing people.
Well, Valerie, I want to say that you were the inspiration for this webinar, because I don't know if you remember, but you connected with me on a previous Digital Communication Network webinar. And from there, it kind of spurred this topic on the energy.
I'd forgotten that. Thank you for reminding me. I do sometimes send letters out of the blue to people.
Well, here's the fruition of them. So we thank you for that.
Well done you.
And I thank all of the panelists today for this really informative and important discussions, and not only for your contributions to this panel, but to your contributions to the field. We really appreciate you taking your time to meet with us today. And also to our participants for being able to connect with so many of you throughout the world. That's really amazing. So this webinar was organized by World Learning in partnership with the Digital Communication Network Global. Thank you to my colleagues at World Learning and our partners at DCN for all your support today. As Valerie mentioned, I will be sending out a follow-up email with the link to today's webinar, the webinar recording, along with the chat content and all of the links that were shared. And this will also include a survey on how we did today. So if you have any lingering questions or want to propose an idea for World Learning to put on a future webinar, please feel free to reach out to our team. We would love to hear from you. So until the next webinar, thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a very good weekend.
You too.
I am in weekend mode now. Take care,
Lovely to
everybody.
meet you
Thank
all.